Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Virtual Travel Escapes from Paul Travel. I hope everybody can hear us and see us. You're actually on listen mode. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will be monitoring that. So if you are having any problems at all, maybe seeing us, just send us a little a note. That would be great. We will be doing this presentation for about 40 minutes. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A. So any questions that you have throughout, just send them off to us. We will be monitoring it, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. So all in all, it'll take about an hour. We're really happy that you're joining us. I'm Rhonda Svihan, the Leisure Manager with Paul Travel, and I'll be co-hosting with Julie Bekdash. She is with Paul Travel as well, and really our expert on Australia. She knows, with knowing a little bit of everything, her expertise, all her knowledge. She also has personally known our guest speaker today, Ernst Flach. So we're excited. I just wanted to kind of also let you know too, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat button. So please, if you want to just like say hi, maybe mention if you've been to Australia before, some fun experiences or places you visit, please put that in the chat box there. For question and answers, in the question and answer box. So that'll just make it a little bit easier. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us on this lovely spring day here in Edmonton. It's nice to see the sun. I hope everybody is doing well, and especially during these times of social distancing. I think now more than ever, many of us are dreaming about where we want to travel to next and what kind of experiences we want to have. So with so many amazing destinations and unique opportunities out there, we really wanted to help you dream. So thanks to this technology, we can explore the world together through our Virtual Travel Escape series. So we hope we find this informative and inspiring. Today we're excited to bring you the beauty of South Australia. I know for me, Australia has always been on my bucket list, so I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you today. If you don't know, South Australia is home to some fantastic wineries. So I just happened to have poured myself a little glass of wine. This happens to be a Malbec from the McLaren Vale area in South Australia. So I think Julie's poured herself a glass of wine as well. You know, what better way to kind of join in and, you know, sip a little wine and learn a little bit about Australia. So that's something too. If you want to put a little note in the chat box, maybe you've got a favorite winery or in the whole southern Australian area. So just put it in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to turn this over now to Julie to introduce our special guest speaker.
Thanks, Rhonda. And yeah, I have a Peter Lehman Shiraz that I'm having this afternoon. So I hope you're all joining in along with that. So welcome, everyone. And again, thanks so much for being here. As Rhonda mentioned, Australia has been my passion since I first traveled there in 2004. And since then, I've earned the Premier Australia Specialist designation, along with about 20 others from travel agents from North America. What that means for our Paul Travel clients is that we get firsthand information on new and niche tour operators, new hotels and attractions that we can share with our clients just to make their experience all just the most wonderful trip to Australia it can be. So throughout my Australia Premier designation, that's where I got to meet Ernst at some of the Tourism Australia conferences. Ernst has been with Tourism South Australia for the last 5 years, and he's going to go over some of these kind of niche places that I mentioned that we've learned about, and he's been there several times himself, so he can share from his personal experience. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Ernst, and feel free to take it away.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Rhonda, and thanks everybody for joining. You know, I really appreciate that you have some South Australia wines in front of you. Unfortunately, I'm going to have a glass of Vancouver water. I still have a couple of hours in the workday, but I'm really envious and I admire your commitment. So let me just call up my slide here, and that'll take us away. Okay. Now, can you see that?
No.
Nope. Oh, okay. Let's try this again.
If anyone here has been to South Australia, or maybe just Australia, maybe let us know in the chat. I'd love to hear who's been or who hasn't on their bucket list.
All right. How's that?
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Yeah. So I'm here live from the Nerve Center of the South Australia Tourism Commission. You know, this is where all the magic happens, and until 6 weeks ago, this was formerly known as my son's bedroom. So, you know, I think we're all looking forward to better times ahead, and hopefully what you're going to get out of this is a little more inspiration and some good thoughts about your next place to vacation. So, as Julie said, I've been with the South Australia Tourism Commission about 5 years, and my secret when I first joined, which wasn't such a secret at the time, was I'd never been to Australia, let alone South Australia. So fortunately, though, when I was hired, it coincided with a bunch of different things, and I was able to spend about a month down there, just totally immersed in everything Australian, everything South Australian, and it just blew my mind. It was amazing. It was everything I thought Australia would be, but much, much more. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to be able to talk to you and just share with you, not because I work for them, but because I'm a traveler like you, and I want to share the experiences I had and the people I met and all the things I did. So it's really fun to talk about this stuff. So what I'll do over the next 25 minutes or so is just give you a bit of a 101 on South Australia, and then I'll talk about my own stories and experiences from some of the trips I've had down there, because it's so much fun, it's so exciting, and I'm here to preach. Can I get a hallelujah? That's it. All right. Yeah, so the goal out of this is really to inspire you, and you know, when you do come to Australia, make sure that this is on your agenda, because Julie is going to put together an amazing program for you, and she'll be able to weave in all these great experiences and make sure you have a fantastic time. So South Australia, the state of South Australia, I guess the first question that comes to mind is like, why go there? You know, what makes it different from the rest of Australia? And really, it gets captured in that headline, the art is in Australia. You know, we're not Sydney, we're not Melbourne, and those are amazing cities, amazing experiences, but that's not South Australia at all. It really is the more intimate art is in Australia. And the way we express this is we do it through a positioning statement, which is kind of a fancy term, but the way we talk about South Australia is we say, you know, for somebody who considers themselves to be a traveler, and not a tourist, but a traveler, and they want to reward their curiosity, there really is no better place than Adelaide and the state of South Australia. And we deliver that promise based on what we call the WOW moments: wildlife, outback, and wine. That's all we do: wildlife, outback, and wine. And we do it really well. And it's all easily accessible in and around Adelaide. And I think as you talk to Julie, you talk to Ron, some of you may not necessarily have a sense of how big Australia is. And naturally, when you start planning and you want to go down there and you want to do all these things, there's a really, you might find yourself planning to do all these things in all these different parts of the country, but that often means a lot of time in the air, a lot of time in airports. And it really is a big advantage to South Australia. It can have all these distinctly, uniquely Australian wow moments, and they're all easily accessible in and around Adelaide. So the 101, so South Australia, it is this state right here in the center of the country. And it's about twice the size of Texas in the US. It's big. And there are only maybe 2 million people who live there. And 70% of those people are living in the capital city of Adelaide. So all this is to say it's not built up. It's not overly developed. you're not going to go down there and be crowded. You're not going to see tour buses everywhere, and it feels different, and that's what makes it great. So Adelaide is probably what you know it for best, but some other destinations within. Kangaroo Island is probably a destination you're familiar with, and that's that little island right there off the coast. It's about a 20-minute flight from Adelaide, or you can take a ferry, 3.5 hours out of the city. And there's also another interesting city called Port Lincoln, which is on just kind of under the D on the tip of the Eyre Peninsula, and that's known as the Aquatic Playground. So to get to Adelaide, there are no direct flights yet from the US. So you'll go through one of the major gateways, be it Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Auckland even. But when you get there, it's just amazing. It's a fantastic way to start a trip. And you know, your Australian vacation starts in Adelaide. Now, Adelaide is this, again, it's not Sydney or Melbourne, it's this boutique city. And it reminds me a lot of Victoria, BC. It's very walkable, very intimate, interesting architecture, loads of outdoor cafes and restaurants, and it just feels different. My favorite moments there, the things I like to do, the Central Market, they have the largest covered market in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's loaded with great food and produce, and it smells really good, and it's just an interesting place to be. But you know, if you take a guided tour, with somebody like Marianne Kennedy, who has a company called The Taste of South Australia. She does these really cool tours where she'll take you behind the scenes and you meet the proprietors, and it turns into more of a cultural experience than anything else. And you know, I think that's what travelers really want nowadays, is not something prefab and manufactured, but you want to have that cultural insight and that behind the scenes tour and connect with the local. And you know, the Central Market Tour is a great way to start your trip like that, because many of those proprietors have been there for generations, and you walk away from there understanding what the culture of the city is and how it became what it is and the history. And it's just a really enlightening moment. Rundle Mall is the central pedestrian area there, and it's great for people watching, it's great for shopping. And you know, I like to tell people that if you need to shop at the Gap, if you need to have your Starbucks, you're probably not going to be happy in Adelaide, because the Gap, Banana Republic, Starbucks, those brands don't even exist there. And that's great because it feels different. You know, you feel like you're in a different place. You feel like you're in Australia, and it's a fun place to go. The Adelaide Oval is the big sporting complex in the city center, and it's kind of the equivalent to I guess the Saddle Dome in Calgary, but even on a grander scale. And what they've done recently is they have the rooftop climb. So you get all suited up in a blue jumpsuit and a harness, and you walk along the perimeter of the Adelaide Oval. And it's, you know, it's a bit of a thrill because you get up pretty high and you're outside, and you know, the wind's in your hair, and it's really neat. And you know, I'm scared of heights, but I managed to get through it, and it was quite fine. It was really interesting and everything. But the other thing about it is the guides are really well versed on the history of the city. So when you're up there, you're seeing the skyline, and they're pointing out all the different things to be aware of in the city and the history, and you learn about the importance of sport to the culture. And it's just, again, another insight into the life of a real Australian. And that's what South Australia is all about, is just understanding lifestyles. Now, one thing I like to bring up, and you don't often hear people talking about it, is you know, when you go to another place and you want to really get to know the people and the culture, there's no better way to do it than through sport. And if you haven't seen an Aussie rules football game, I completely recommend it. It's so completely different, so completely foreign to anything we have here, but it's such a spectacle. And you don't have to like sports. I don't particularly follow sports or really have much of an interest in it, but to go see an Aussie rules football game, it's like going to see a concert. So you'll walk in, first of all, the game makes no sense. You can't compare it to football, you can't compare it to soccer. It's even hard to compare it to rugby, but so it makes no sense. But it's fast, it's interesting. But when you walk into the Adelaide Oval, you know, you're going to be surrounded by 50,000 people, and they're all yelling and screaming. And pretty soon, you know, you'll be looking around because you don't understand what's going on, and pretty soon people around you pick up on that, and then they hear your accent. They realize, oh, somebody here is visiting, and then suddenly, you know, the people beside you start giving you tips, and here's what's going on, and they'll be buying you beer, and suddenly you have 50,000 new friends just cheering you on. And again, you walk out of there feeling, I just had this electrical moment with locals, and that's what travel is all about. But so that's Adelaide, a snapshot view of it. But to go back to those wow moments, I'll start with the wine and the wow. Now, 70% of the wines that are exported from Australia wind up in Rhonda and Julie's kitchens. No, I'm just kidding. No, 70% of the wines that are exported from Australia come from the state of South Australia. So what that means is, we know what we're doing, and where there's great wine, there's going to be great food. So from a traveler's perspective, or a visitor's perspective, what makes it great is there are over 200 wine cellars within a 2-hour drive of Adelaide. And that includes these really, really well-known regions like the Barossa Valley, McLaren Vale, Adelaide Hills, the Clare Valley. And you're going to see a lot of the marquee brands that you've probably heard of here, Jacobs Creek, Penfolds, Derenberg, I believe you had Wira around it. So lots of well-known brands. But I think from a traveler's perspective, what's exciting are those dozens and hundreds of wineries that nobody's ever heard of. And you're going to have these countless experiences of, you pull up in the driveway of somebody's, it doesn't even look like a winery, it looks like somebody's garage, and the guy comes out and he doesn't have on a uniform. He'll have on like a dirty shirt and muddy boots and the whole bit, but it's the guy, it's his winery. It's not a guy who works for the guy who works for the guy, it's his. And they're so proud of their craft, and they'll have great wine. First and foremost, great wine, but they'll have even better stories, and they'll talk about the terroir, and they'll talk about their family's history there. And it just turns into this really amazing moment. And again, you walk out of there feeling like you've connected with a local on an authentic basis. And that's what South Australia does really well. So the O in the wow, it's around the Outback. Now, when you go to Australia, you have to go to the Outback. Everybody wants to, right? It's an iconic experience. And our point of difference is that the Outback is just a little more easily accessible from Adelaide than it is from most other parts of the country. So with a 45-minute flight or a 4.5-hour drive, that'll put you in the heart of that real deal red dirt Outback. And like what you see on the screen in front of you is a thing called the Wilpena Pound. And this picture doesn't do it justice. It's this massive, massive, massive tabletop rock formation in the middle of nowhere, and it's just breathtaking. But there's you're going to see red kangaroos everywhere, emus running around, cockatoo, all kinds of animals, and all kinds of quirky people. If you drive, and I drove up there, and I loved it because I love road trips. But there's just the most mundane stuff in your normal day-to-day life becomes exciting when you're there. So, for example, driving up there, at some point I stopped to get gas, and it was just some little tin shack gas station. Went inside to pay, and of course they had a pub in the back, and then they heard my accent, and suddenly I'm having a beer with these guys in the back, and they're just talking about what it's like to be a sheep shearer up there. It's just really, really neat. And if you really want something different, go to the outback of the Outback, which is Coober Pedy, and it's a town that's known for being the largest opal mine site in the world, but also where half the town dwells underground. Super interesting place, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a couple of minutes. So the last W in the wow is around wildlife, and South Australia is all about wildlife in the wild, and you don't have to look for it. It's just everywhere. And I can't tell you how many times I've met people who've said, oh, I've been to Australia 2-3 times. I've never seen a kangaroo in the wild. And then you ask, where have you been? Oh, yeah, I've been to Sydney, I've been to Brisbane. I'm like, well, get outside of that. That is part of Australia, but you really want to see the part that you haven't seen it, because it's amazing. And South Australia's wildlife is just phenomenal. Even in Adelaide, those yellow koala crossing signs that you may have seen. I always thought they were like an Outback Steakhouse gag kind of thing, but they're real. Like in Adelaide, they have them there because those animals are everywhere. Now, Kangaroo Island is probably the best known place in South Australia for seeing animals. And really, the name says it all. It really is a zoo without fences. And I'll tell you a bit more about my experiences there in a sec. Port Lincoln, as I mentioned, that's the Aquatic Playground. And there you do things like swim with sea lions, swim with seals. If you're really brave, you can go cage diving with great white sharks. You can go out to oyster farms out there, and that's really neat. You go out and you put on your hip waders. The farmer takes you out and he'll talk about his life and what it's like to raise oysters. And meanwhile, he's reaching down in the water and plucking these things. It's like eating apples off a tree, except oysters out of the ocean, and it's just phenomenal. So yeah, wildlife in the wild, that's what we do really, really well. And if you want to do this wow kind of itinerary, the wildlife, the outback, and wine, on a luxury level, if you really want to treat yourself, there's a great way to do it, and you can tie it into specific accommodations that will bring those experiences to life. So if you look at Kangaroo Island and the wildlife experience, Sea Dragon Lodge is a great place to be. It's a small little villas, and they have their own little private beach. So if you walk 10 minutes down from the lodge, he's got this little cove, a little beach, and a seal colony of his own, basically. It just hangs out there. So it's a really nice thing. For the outback, Archibald Conservancy in Flinders Ranges is amazing. It's an old sheep shearing station from probably 200 years ago. And they haven't used it, of course, for sheep shearing